the Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way
Is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way.
Oh, the Jesus way
Is the way of peace.
is the way of peace.
Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace. When he is king, all wars will cease. May his peace begin with me.
Brethren Volunteer Service is a full-time volunteer program that places volunteers in a 1 or 2 year long assignment in the United States and in a number of countries around the world. Approximately 7,000 individuals have served in Brethren Volunteer Service since its beginnings in 1948. Hello, I'm Brent Carlson. Welcome to Brethren Voices. Brethren Volunteer Service, or BVS for short, is marked by two key milestones in 2013. The 65th anniversary of the program's enactment by annual conference and the training and deployment of Volunteer Unit 300. We have featured several programs about Brethren Volunteer Service in our 8 years of Brethren Voices. And having Dan McFadden, the director of BVS, with us today is a real honor and privilege. Dan McFadden, welcome to Brethren Voices.
Thank you, Brent. It's good to be here.
It's good to have you.
Thank you.
The website of the Church of the Brethren indicates that you have been the director of Brethren Volunteer Service for 17 plus years.
Oh, it's true.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you got to be the director?
Well, one of our staff at the Church of the Brethren, Chris Douglas, was on a plane with me and asked if I would consider applying for the position of BVS. This would have been back in the spring of 1995. And I've lived in Elgin for a number of years. My wife is on the staff, and so I said, sure, I'll think about that. And so I submitted my application, and they hired me.
That's amazing. What were you doing before?
I'm a social worker by background, so my licensed clinical social worker, and I was working at a hospital in Elgin on a psychiatric unit, St. Joseph Hospital. My background was mental health and addictions, and that was going just fine, but I had gotten my degree in 1989, social work degree, but this was a good fit, I thought, and I had served myself as a BVSer back in the early 80s, and so I got interested in the position and the nature of the kind of work I was doing in the social work field, working with organizations and helping their employees who had mental health issues. I was doing some of that kind of work. I also felt like that was a good fit with BVS. Not that there are a lot of mental health issues, but working with young people and with volunteers and some of the struggles that they have sometimes, but also connecting with organizations and agencies and helping to arrange the placements. That's some of the stuff that got me interested.
I've run into so many people that have been BVS volunteers when they were young, and some as they're older. So where did you serve? And it sounds like it's been a theme in your life ever since.
Well, when I was in college, Brent, it was kind of interesting. I didn't really know that much about Brethren Volunteer Service. One of my classmates in college is Kristen Flory, and she is on the staff with BVS, and she is based in Europe. She's our coordinator for Europe, and she's been on the staff for 25 years. And but I didn't really know that much about BVS. And then one of the staff members at the time, Karen Calderon, called me and said, would you be interested in coming into BVS and going to Latin America? We'd like to send you and another volunteer, Steve Newcomer, and send you down to Central America, and we'd like you specifically for you to go to Honduras. So they sent us to Honduras, where we worked with refugees during that conflict that was taking place in Latin America and El Salvador. And so refugees on the border of Honduras and El Salvador that came from El Salvador into Honduras. And we were basically doing accompaniment. But they didn't call it that back then, but really that's what it was. And so we were with the refugees as they moved from the border up into some refugee camps that were operated by the United Nations High Commission on Refugees and the High Commission on Refugees. And so we helped to accompany those refugees from the border areas up into these refugee camps. So that was my time.
There were some safety issues, so that was probably, they needed that accompaniment.
Well, there were safety issues. They were getting harassed by the military on both sides, by El Salvadorian military coming across the border and by Honduran military. And they They wanted international people to be a presence with those refugees, and so we lived with them and then accompanied them on trucks, big cattle trucks that loaded them up, and we'd go about a 7 or 8 hour drive up the mountain a ways until they came to this refugee camp where they were relocated and settled in, and then we'd head back down and come back with them. And it was a war zone, so it was a safety issue for us too in some cases, although I don't know how much we really knew that, and it wasn't, our international assignments are 2 years, but in this case it was a 6-month term because of the nature of the assignment. So there was some preparation and there was some follow-up afterwards, so I was in BVS for 1 year at that point.
Do you have a Brethren background? Where did you grow up? And
Yes. My family is Church of the Brethren. My mother was Church of the Brethren. My father was Church of the Brethren. My grandfather was pastor, was a minister at the Highland Avenue Church of the Brethren in Elgin for 11 years, from the early 50s until early 1960, and then he relocated out to Pasadena, California, and he was pastor there until he died suddenly of leukemia back in the mid-60s. But our family has been in the Church of the Brethren for many years.
Did you grow up in Elgin?
No, I grew up in, I grew up in Indonesia, quite frankly.
Oh, so your whole childhood there.
Well, I was born at Bethany Hospital, so how do you get more brethren than that, right? Bethany Hospital in Chicago. My dad was in medical school at the time, and then we eventually we were in Puerto Rico for a short time, and then we were in Indonesia for 2 different stints, 2 different times. And then we lived for a time in between the furlough. We were on furlough time in Southern California in Laverne. And then we finished our time in Indonesia and we moved to North Manchester, Indiana. And I went to high school there, and that's where I graduated high school, and then went to college there also.
Well, your Brethren roots are deep, and you've
One of our former volunteers, her name is Tracy Stoddard. I can't remember her last name right now, but Tracy says, she said, I'm a plopped brethren. He was born brethren, plopped brethren. I'm a plopped brethren.
BVS is one of the most important, I think, missions of the Church of the Brethren, and it's been really survived lots of ups and downs.
Yeah.
And what's going on? I guess I'm really curious. You have 100 projects on the books, and you have 75 to 80 volunteers.
Yep.
So how do you match? Because you've got an overage in one.
Well,
what's going on?
In terms of this being, I would say that in terms of this being an important part of the ministry of the Church of the Brethren, at the core, I think, of who Brethren identify themselves today, one of our significant values is service. And that's what BVS is, of course. And so it's an opportunity for people to serve, to give back, to share with the world their gifts. And so then we go about trying to match up the volunteers that apply with us with the projects that we have around the country and around the world. And if they want to serve in the United States, they serve for 1 year minimum. They, or if they're going abroad, we ask them to make a 2-year commitment.
So, as a director, do you have a number of staff? And
we have a small staff. There is one other full-time paid staff person. Callie Serber is our orientation coordinator, and that orientation coordinator used to be called the training director, and it's evolved over the years, but that person is now based in Elgin, Illinois. And then we have, in a sense, we have a part-time person that's helping to do recruitment. Emily Tyler has joined our staff last summer, and she coordinates the work camp program, and the work camp program of the Church of the Brethren now works with Brethren Volunteer Service, so I supervise that. And then, and she will spend part of her time also doing recruitment.
And these are full-time, regular paid staff?
Regular paid staff. And then we also have 2 positions in our office for volunteers. So as an organization that sends out volunteers into the world, we also host volunteers on our staff. So we too have volunteers that serve for 1 year at a time. Usually they're second-year volunteers, and we invite them to help us with our orientation and our training and our publications, and also with our recruitment. Right now we're a little short. We only have 1 staff person one volunteer staff person with us, so we have an opening now too. So that's the staff for us here in the United States would be, in a sense, 2.5 full-time paid staff, or staff, 2.5 staff, and then some volunteer staff. And then we also have coordinators in other parts of the world. So we have Kristen Flory, who's a half-time coordinator based in Geneva, Switzerland, and she coordinates all of our Europe placements, and then we have Todd Bauer, who is a coordinator based, he's a part-time coordinator based in Guatemala. He lives down there. So,
What are your responsibilities as the director?
well, I help.
You don't have to list them all.
Oh,
But
no.
I kind of like
Well,
to
I
help
would
people understand what you do.
I guess I haven't always thought of myself this way, but at the moment I'm one of the public faces of the program. So I've been around long enough that if you're a young person coming into BVS at 20, 22, 23 years of age, I'm the person who you've seen about BVS at National Youth Conference. So whether I like it or not, I guess I'm the public face of BVS in some ways. From a staff perspective, the real public face of BVS, Brent, would be our volunteers, of course, and the projects where they serve. But my duties would be in helping to, overall helping to recruit, certainly, also helping to place the volunteers, contacts with the agencies and organizations that are our project sites, helping to initiate some of those connections, follow up with them. And a real big part of the responsibility is when things begin to, when the wheels come off in some way, sometimes when that happens, I'm in the middle of all of that too.
I want to talk about that one, the troubleshooting. But when you have 80 volunteers,
Yeah.
and you have 2 enrollment times in a year, or 2 or 3?
Or 2 trainings?
Two
We have actually 4.
4, okay.
Possibly 5. Depends on if we have an older adult piece of that component that runs. But we have 3 standard orientation times in the summer and in the fall and in the winter, and we also have a special orientation time for the Brethren Revival Fellowship. They have their own training component, and I participate in that also.
So are you recruiting all the time then for
Yes,
these?
all the time.
Okay, so then based on the people that are selected, you fit them into one of those trainings.
Those training, yeah. So oftentimes they'll choose. Do they want to come into the summer orientation or the fall orientation? Our next one coming up is this summer, and so we're working with people now who are getting ready to come into that orientation. So we go through. They have an application they fill out with references, and once that's completed, we do an interview with them, and then and we have to agree that they're going to. We have to select them and say, yes, you've been accepted into Brethren Volunteer Service. Somebody was asking me just a little bit ago, well, what are your standards? Well, we want people to be qualified for this. So we want them to be willing to serve, to be willing to take on a full-time position in an organization, be willing to work hard, be willing to show up on a regular basis, be responsible, be good workers, be willing to learn. It's helpful if you come in and not be the person who feels like you have the answers. So as an example, here in Portland, one of the organizations that we work with is called Human Solutions. Human Solutions has been around for 25 years. Their 25th anniversary is this year. They know what they're doing. So as our volunteers come into that organization, we ask them to come in and support and be a part of and listen and learn and help out in that organization and become one of their staff to the best of their ability at that point. And so, so part of our training and working with the volunteers is getting them prepared for that, and I help with that too.
So if I was going to ask you what kind of a person you're going to look for,
Yeah.
You didn't mention age.
We can take you as old as you are able to serve, but you have to be 18.
Okay.
So 18 years of age. The oldest volunteer we had a number of years ago was a gentleman by the name of Gene Petrie. And Gene Petrie was a retired dentist who came into BVS at the age of 84. And he served at Camp Ithiel down in Florida for a 6-month stint. So we allow older adults to choose a 6-month term if that's what they would like, assuming that the project can take them for 6 months. And so he worked for 6 months at Camp Ithiel, and he worked hard. Mike Neff, who is the director down there, he had a hard time getting Gene to shut down in the end of the day. So he'd be up working at 7 o'clock in the morning, and he'd still work at 7 o'clock at night, running around on the golf carts and doing a variety. He'd work in the kitchen, he was doing maintenance, he was hosting, he was welcoming people. Gene really enjoyed that.
So people have to be able to live a simple, relatively frugal life because they get room and board and $100
a month. Well, one of the principles of BVS is simple living. And I guess I say that probably it's one of the principles of the Church of the Brethren. One of the values that we hold on to is simple living. But I would maintain that the people who live the most simply in the Church of the Brethren are BVSers. Aside for some families who intentionally live below maybe the poverty line, but BVSers try to live pretty simply. Now that doesn't mean that they don't most probably nowadays have cell phones and maybe
Computers, they got
computers,
laptop
and
computers.
and more than likely it's family who are continuing to maintain them on their cell phone family plan. That's why they're able to do that. But we invite them to live within that $100 a month for their stipend. In a sense, it's their salary, their pay, and they do. They're not going out to some of the latest shows sometimes or the latest movies, or I understand that here in Portland, one of the shining stars as far as of a group is Pink Martini, and the tickets for Pink Martini I'm sure aren't very cheap, and but as volunteers, people have offered to provide them tickets to some of those concerts, and that happens in other places too. So volunteers will sometimes get opportunities through their agencies and programs to go to baseball games and basketball games and some of those kinds of things. But other than that, we really do hope that they live simply. We encourage them not to have a vehicle or a car. So our volunteers here in Portland, they don't have a car, and they get around on bicycle. And one of the volunteers rides her bike almost an hour, 45 minutes to an hour every day, one way to work.
I didn't know that.
Yes.
This might be a time to stop our conversation for a short moment and take a look at another aspect of BVS. I think this is a good time to mention that you have a volunteer service project workbook.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And this is also on the website, but you can get this and look at it. Mm-hmm. You have an amazing amount of projects.
Yeah, we do.
And you're in 21 states, as I count them up, in the District of Columbia, and 15 countries.
Okay.
So how do you select, or how do you find projects to
Brett, it's
include?
interesting. Actually, probably in most cases, the projects find us. Maybe an exception was here in Portland, for example, when the church got interested in developing a community house, intentional community house here that was sponsored by the church. Then we had to find projects here in Portland. So we began to look, and the local congregation worked with us. And Kirby Lauderdale, the pastor here, we had a volunteer that had been in our office, Beth Merrill, who lives here in Portland. She helped also making contacts with the projects. And through that, then we made connections. But in many cases, the projects find us. So one of the projects we have is in Havre, Montana. And the executive director of that project called me one time. And I got on the phone with him. I said, Tom, I don't even know where Havre, Montana is. I had to look it up on a map. And I didn't have the website at that point to look up. But that, I was
actually
looking on a map.
been there, and I have friends there.
Yeah. Well, we have a BVS site there, the Human Resource Development Council, Area 4. And, well, Tom had been the director of a project site of ours in Fremont, California, the Tri-City Homeless Coalition, which he had helped to start. So then he relocated and moved to Havre, Montana, and then he calls me. And I said, Tom, I can't think of anybody who wants to come to Havre, Montana. The first year that project was available, we had 4 volunteers go.
You talked about the projects sometimes contact you, but what are you looking for in a project? Because you have certain categories of projects you're looking for.
Our goals in BVS are to advocate for peace and justice, and to serve human need, and care for the creation, the environment. So within that context, of course, that's pretty broad. We try to find organizations that meet some of those criteria. For the most part, I would say that most social service, not-for-profit organizations fit into that category. If they're trying to help people in their communities, we'd be happy to work with them. Some of our organizations are very small, 1 or 2 people who help run those programs, and rely on a lot of volunteer help locally. An example of that is Snowcap here in Portland, and their paid staff is just a handful of people, versus Human Solutions, which has a paid staff of almost 100 people, and they have several different locations, and they have housing programs, and so we run the range. In Cincinnati, Ohio, one of the projects that we have is called the Interfaith Hospitality Network, and there's a type of program like that here in Cincinnati and in Portland also. But in there, the staff is very small, and then we have a volunteer with an organization called Talbert House, and they have over 300 employees. They're the largest not-for-profit agency in Cincinnati, and so we run the range in terms of the organizations we work with.
I've noticed BVS is in Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina and El Salvador and Guatemala. And what would you say, and South Sudan? What would you say is the most interesting project site out of the United States? or 2 or 3?
I would get, I will get the coordinators upset with me if I single out one. I think we've had a long history in Europe, and Kristen Flory has been there now on our staff for over 25 years. Actually,
she's got more tenure than you.
Oh, of course, yes, yeah, it's an amazing story. And Kristen, 26 years actually here in April here this year, and so. But long-time relationships with hot spot settings in the Balkans and in Northern Ireland. I think those are some interesting places for people to be. If you go to Bosnia-Herzegovina, you're going to have to learn the language, and it's not the war-torn place that it maybe was 10 years ago. But it still has its struggles, and Northern Ireland has the peace accords, of course, that have brought some peace there, and it's not quite the tension that it was, but the tension still exists. The troubles are still a part of life there in Northern Ireland, and so our volunteers get to try to be a part of that place. In Southern Sudan, this is a new country. That country has been around now for, I think it's going to be coming up on 2 years. It's 2-year anniversary soon, and the volunteers get to be a part of this new developing country and work there in a couple of different settings. In Latin America, of course, there's an ongoing struggle with some of the issues and struggles that they have down there. Spanish, if you can learn Spanish, that's one of the significant languages in our own country here in the United States. To know and learn and to have an affiliation or a knowledge of that culture is very helpful.
The February 2013 edition of Brethren Voices featured Rachel Buller of Georgia, who is a volunteer in Japan with the Asian Rural Institute. And I was privileged to meet her and see that wonderful project. She, we found, is the first person to be assigned there. Can you tell us about that and how that program was set up?
Their original connection is through the United Methodist, but they do sustainable agricultural training for people from all over the developing world who come in, as you know, Brent, for a 9-month period of time, and they learn how to work with animals and crops and different kinds of plants and stuff. But they were very happy to have a connection with Brethren Volunteer Service and the Church of the Brethren. And so Jay was willing to support that, and we finally got things in place to receive a volunteer, and Rachel went there a year and a half ago.
The other nice thing that I saw there is that they're teaching these people to be leaders in their community. And that kind of leadership is a very important issue.
Well, and I think in that same vein, they're teaching Rachel how to be leaders too. And Rachel will come back with an experience and exposure to what that means to be a leader in her community then too. And that's actually true for the folks here, you know, for the volunteers here in Portland. They will be leaders someday, and their experience and training in BVS, I think, will serve them that way.
Dan McFadden.
Yeah.
I'm sorry we have to end this conversation. It's been wonderful. And there's so much more I want to talk about. But thank you for being with us on Brethren Voices.
You're welcome. It's good to be here.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed the program. And BVS is an important service opportunity for any of you who are looking for something interesting to do to help make the world a better place. So we invite you to look on the website. You can give them a call. And as you heard the director say, anybody 18 and older who wants to make some effort to help others is more than welcome to apply. So this is Brent Carlson with Brethren Voices wishing you peace.
All those who tread the path he trod, all those who tread the path he trod, all those who tread the path he trod shall be called the friends of God. May his peace begin with me. Oh, the Jesus way is the way of peace.